In February of 1966, I was with the 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines in Quang Ngai Province, South Vietnam. Our battalion had landed on a large amphibious assault, probably the largest since Incheon in Korea back in the 50s. We landed in January and Valentine's Day was coming up. So here I am in a dried out rice paddy, wondering what I'm going to do about getting a Valentine for my wife for Valentine's Day. So somehow I got the idea that maybe I could tear up a piece of a sea ration carton, place it in an envelope in the military mail, and get it back to her sometime later in the year. So out of that grew a small Valentine, which I tore from the sea ration carton, wrote up on the sea ration Valentine that I had torn, "My heart's all out of shape for you, honey. Happy Valentine's Day." So eventually this did get back to Hanna, who was living in California at the time. And we have always kind of celebrated Valentine's Day around that because we were apart for that year. Later, after we came back on ship from that operation, our battalion moved to Chulai. We were in Chulai from March of 66 to June of 66. And then later on moved to Da Nang and were responsible for the southern area of Da Nang around Marble Mountain. Sometime before we left Chulai, we made arrangements for R&R trip. So Hanna took her first airplane trip from California to Honolulu to Tokyo and met me for 5 days on a R&R trip. She was able to get there a couple of days before I did and did some touring of Tokyo, and I, of course, had 5 days of R&R. It was almost interrupted by the fact that just before our R&R flight left the night before in Da Nang, the plane we were supposed to take was almost hit by mortar fire. So that would have very definitely messed up my R&R trip. But it turns out that everything did work out well. We were able to meet in Tokyo. We stayed in the Frank Lloyd Wright designed Imperial Hotel. This is the older version. It's been torn down and a newer version has been built. I believe at the time the cost of the hotel bill was around $9.75 US. Today in the new Imperial Hotel would probably be closer to $900 US. So things have changed quite a bit in Tokyo in that case. But as it turned out, I was a first lieutenant then, and I was turned out I was the highest ranking person on the R&R flight from Da Nang to Tachikawa Air Force Base outside Tokyo. So I was responsible for 90-something guys that were flying up to Japan on R&R. Our plane landed at Tachikawa Air Force Base, where I was pretty sure my wife was waiting for me. But the military, in their wisdom, would not let us off the plane there without getting on a bus, busing us 3/4 of the way around Tokyo. After meeting my wife in Tokyo, where we had a 5-day R&R, I proceeded to go back to Tachikawa Air Force Base, fly back to Da Nang, and then catch a helicopter ride back to my unit in Chulai. And then about a month or so later, the unit moved to Da Nang, and we were responsible for the area of Da Nang south of Da Nang, an area called Marble Mountain, which would be very familiar to any of the Marines that might have been in Acor area. The unit that I was with started out in California, and I was fortunate in that the unit that I joined had just come back from overseas and was reconstituted in California. We actually went to Okinawa and spent 2 or 3 months on Okinawa in training, before we went to Vietnam and landed on a across the beach assault called Operation Double Eagle, which again, as I mentioned previously, was one of the largest amphibious assaults since the landing in Incheon. And to my knowledge, there has not been since a large-scale marine amphibious assault. Now most of the transport is by helicopter. or by other types of equipment, and so this may go down as one of the largest amphibious assaults, again, versus Incheon in history. After serving for 13 months overseas, part of which was Okinawa, I was transferred actually a month early back to the U.S. and spent my last year on active duty with the Marine Corps in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I was with the 4th Battalion, 10th Marines, an artillery unit which had equipment. The M109 self-propelled gun was the equipment that we had. My experiences there were somewhat varied because the section that I was supposed to command had a allotment for 35 individuals, but because everyone was either going to or getting back from Vietnam, at one time there was only myself and 4 other people in a group that was supposed to have 35 people in it. But one of the things that I remember most about that part of my tour was the artillery units went to Villegas in the Caribbean for a firing exercise, and because I was pretty soon being released, I was assigned to be the officer in charge of everything that was left in the subunit, which included everyone that was on leave, everyone that was in the brig. I can remember getting several letters of investigation of, or from congressional people or families or something about, why was their son in the brig and what were we doing about it, and this kind of thing. So, but that all worked out very well, and then I was released from active duty in September of 1967.
They were both born in Czechoslovakia, and they worked for a shoe factory named Bata, B-A-T-A, and in 1939 they were chosen to, Mr. Bata started shoe factories all over the world, or his desire was to do that. He had a very strong business making shoes in this town in Czechoslovakia. And so he chose 150 people to come to the United States to start a shoe factory in Belcamp, Maryland. And so my mother and father did not know each other at the factory because it was a huge factory and they didn't work together, but they met on the ship as they came to the United States. And they worked here for a while, and I don't know exactly how long, but a year or so. And I don't know if their work visas ran out. I don't know what the reason was, but Mr. Baccia wanted to build a factory in the Philippines. So he chose a few people to go to the Philippines to work, to start this factory there. And he chose my mother and father again. They were both single. They, had gotten to know each other on the boat and so forth. And so they get to the Philippines, and the war broke out, and I guess it was around the time that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and the Czech people were very much allied with the Americans because the Germans were coming into their country, and they didn't want to. They didn't want to be aligned with the German people. So, and the Japanese and the Germans were, aligned. So my father volunteered, he and 13 others volunteered with the American War Department. And the day they volunteered, they were taken to Bataan in the Philippines. He was in Manila. He and my mother were living in Manila. And these 14 men were taken to Bataan. And my father was a mechanic, and so his job in Bataan, or with the American War Department, was to find any equipment that could be fixed and fix it. And if it couldn't be fixed, then he needed to take the parts that were workable and use it to fix something else. And so he was kind of in the woods and all over because there were tanks and various things that were broken down, and he was trying to take some of the equipment. So when the Americans surrendered at Bataan, the Japanese were there, and they were herding everybody up to start the Bataan Death March, and they were forcing all of the people to go miles and miles across the mountain and so forth to these camps, prison camps. And at the time that my father joined the War Department and got to Bataan, the Americans had very little supplies already because most of the war concentration was in Europe. And the people there were on 2 meals a day already, and like I said, they didn't have equipment and so forth. So my father had been in the woods looking for things, and when he saw what the Japanese were doing, he went to the water, the edge of the water, and there was an island of Corregidor right across from Bataan. It was 5 miles across the water. And he found a boat that was in the water that belonged to a Chinese man. And the Chinese man said the boat didn't work. So my father tinkered with it and was able to get it started. And they put as many people as they could on the boat and went to Corregidor. So they were there, and then the Americans surrendered at Corregidor, and the Japanese took everybody and herded them down to the water and put them on a boat and took them back to Manila, to a prison in Manila. And the last time my mother saw my father, she was 6 months pregnant with me. And he was in a prison in Manila, in the city. And then all these prisoners were taken to different prison camps around on the island of Luzon, where Manila is. And he was in 2 different prison camps. One was Cabanatuan, and one was Camp O'Donnell. And this picture is me pointing to a statue that is in the Philippines, near one of the prison camps, and my father's name is on that statue. There were 7 Czech men that died during the war, and 7 survived. And in 2006, Don and I went to Manila, my first trip back after having come here. I need to back up a little bit, I guess. After my father died, my mother married an American who was stationed in Manila, and he was from Pikeville, Tennessee. His name was Edgar Romans, and so he came back with his Army unit. A year later, my mother came to America, and she left me with an American colonel and his Filipino wife, and they had a daughter. The American colonel was from Alabama, and so they took care of me. I was 4, and when I was 6, I finally left the Philippines and came to America. And so this is my passport picture here. I'm 6 years old, and I came across on a boat, and my parents had saved or had hired someone to be sure that I had my meals, and I went to bed and I took a bath and all that. And my stepfather met me in San Francisco, met my ship in San Francisco, and I didn't remember him because it had been 2 years since I had seen him. And he insisted that I had to go with him, and of course he had all the paperwork and everything, and so they let me go. And we took a train across country, and finally got to Alabama, and then we took a bus to Pikeville, Tennessee. And when we did, we were walking down the street to their house, and I didn't remember my mother. And so I was a real brat because I was crying and unhappy and everything, but eventually everything settled down, and school had already started, so I started the first grade in Pikeville, Tennessee. So back to my father. He was in 2 different prison camps, Camp O'Donnell and Camp Cabanatuan, and he and a bunch of Americans were placed on a Japanese prison ship called the Inooro Maru, and that ship sank in Subic Bay Harbor in the Philippines. And my father survived. There were about 400 or so that survived. So they were herded into a tennis court area, and eventually were placed on another ship called the Inooro Maru, and he was taken to Formosa, and that ship was sunk. Both ships were sunk by the American, I forgot the name of the ship, the Hornet, the American Hornet had sunk both ships because they were Japanese ships and they didn't know that there were prisoners of war on the ship. Well, 409 people died on that ship, and that's the last that we know of my father. I have a manifest with his name on it that he was on that ship. After the war, I don't have that framed in here, but after the war, the Americans exhumed, or the people that that died on that ship, the bodies were buried in Formosa Harbor somewhere. And after the war, the Americans exhumed those bodies and moved them to the Punch Bowl in Hawaii. And so there are mass graves in Hawaii, and they say like 15 remains, 22 remains, 25 remains, and these are markers. And if you go to the office of the cemetery at the Punch Bowl, they have a list of the people that they think are buried in these graves. And so anyway, eventually, yes, my mother got this, signed by Harry Truman. My grandmother, my father's mother, also had one of these. And so after my mother passed away, I found this in her some of her belongings. I didn't know about this until after she passed away. And so I had it framed. And this is a memorial in the town of Stipa, S-T-I-P-A, in the Czech Republic. And my father's picture is right here. These are men that died in World War I, and these are men that died in World War II from this little town. Now, they all weren't in the Philippines. They just happened to be from that town. And there's a Catholic church, and they erected this monument across the street from the Catholic church. And this is a POW medal, a prisoner of war medal, that I was awarded after I moved to Murfreesboro. Don checked to see if it was possible for me to get something like this, and it was. And so on the front is the eagle and the concertina wire around the edge of the eagle. And on the back is my father's name, and it says prisoner of war. So here's a picture of it as well. And this is a picture of my father right here. And here's a picture of my father. So we have been to the Czech Republic several times. We went when it was still Czechoslovakia in 1976 and met my father's family and my mother's family. My grandparents were dead, but I had several aunts and uncles that were living, and we met them and lots of cousins. And so on one of those trips is when we made this picture. And then also my uncle in the Czech Republic received these two medals from the Philippine government, Defense Medal and Liberation Medal. And they have those in the Czech Republic, and they have offered to give those to me, but I don't have any children, and all my family is over there, and so I think it needs to stay in the family. And like I said, this is my father's picture, and this is a picture of me. This is, I think this is his passport, maybe picture, or I don't know if it was when he was going to America from Czechoslovakia or to the Philippines, I don't know. But I just put this little picture in there because it's a picture of me. And so that's my story. So like I said, we've been to the Czech Republic several times, and we've met the family, and I have several things here that they have given me from time to time, and so that's it.